Hello and welcome back to 100 Yards of Football, Sports Talk Radio. I'm your producer, Jeremiah Long, and joining me to talk about the man himself, Barry Switzer, the legendary coach from Oklahoma, are two men who understand how legends are made. One who understands how legends are made because he's watched his entire life the game of football evolve and watch legends go from high school into college, into the NFL, and then into the post-NFL where they continue to be legends by being amazing members of the community. And also a man who's a legend himself. So obviously he knows the path. He knows the path from growing up, putting on his first shoes, walking out of the door, running down the street that first time, going on to play in the smallest leagues, the medium leagues, into the college, into the NFL itself, and again, after the NFL career, continuing to be a legend by serving his community. Mr. Harper LaBelle, how's it going?
Jeremiah, thank you. I guess that introduction, that was for Vincent there with first time in the shoes and all of that. But thank you so very much. We're going to talk about a legend.
Like Vincent, he woke up. He could tell you what color shirt he was wearing on what Wednesday when he saw one of his favorite games in the 70s and 80s. And that's why he's Mr. Football Encyclopedia. But you, sir, took the dream from I don't know when. I'd love to know when sometime. We'll do a great interview to talk more about it. But when that dream was sparked, when it was nurtured, the people who helped nurture it and took you on to be first a college football legend and then into an NFL legend. And again, in your post career to continue to serve the community. So, I mean, I feel like I'm very fortunate to be here with y'all and to be talking about these incredible people through the years. And one other thing about the 100 Yards of Football that I think is so meaningful and why I love doing the show with y'all is because we talk about the history of football from the perspective of the people who watch the show, the biggest fans in the world. And so I really appreciate that. And I'm just a big fan of our show myself.
Well, speaking of being a fan, tell me one thing that you would think of when I mention the name Barry Switzer. Is there anything that comes to mind? And what's the first one, if you don't mind me asking?
Winning.
There you go. Where? Where?
Let me show you. I've got a great graphic here for us here. Hold on. Okay, I put the stats up here on the side, right? So if you go through it, 157, 29-4, 3 national championships, 12 Big 8 titles, 50 All-Americans, 10 win seasons. It just goes on and on. 1973, 1974, undefeated. And I mean, it is one of the people that I think that really harkens back to the era of the greats when there were people who just stood above and beyond the rest of all of college football. And yeah, that's what I think about.
Well, Vincent, we may not even have to do a show because all of those stats right there pretty much amplify at least a certain part of what the legacy would be for Barry Switzer. What an amazing life and career that he's had. And from a football perspective, we're going to discuss him a little bit today. But Vincent, good morning.
How you doing, Mr. Harper LaBelle?
I'm doing great. And once again, I start doing my research and go, what can I say about Barry that nobody else knows? And what an interesting life this man has led, not just with Oklahoma, not just with the Dallas Cowboys, so many other things. Before we get into the nitty gritty, what are some of the finer points that you go, I want to make sure that I express this today during the show?
You're looking at Coach Switzer, comes from a little town in Arkansas, Crossett, Arkansas, which is about 40 miles from Dermot, Arkansas, that I used to visit in the mid-'70s. I visited my Uncle Robert down there, who's deceased, was a Vietnam veteran. And I remember when I was 13 years old, my uncle said, we're going to go over to Crossett to watch this baseball league play, your age. It was 13 and 14-year-olds playing at this field in Crossett. And what stuck out to me, it looked like everybody was in town. The energy level was at another, I couldn't even describe it. And man, from a black athlete and white athlete perspective, I knew then them people were serious. And when I think about Barry Switzer, I think about him in that environment. I understand why he was so competitive. Understand why he had that swag in the 70s. And then I understand why he said one thing about football. You can scheme. I can run the greatest wishbone in the world. I can do all that talking. But the bottom line in football is winning. Winning. And he was the guy that took Oklahoma to that other level, Harper. Look what he followed. That's so amazing as a head coach. The monster that Oklahoma was built in the 50s under Bud Wilkerson. 2 winning streaks of 47 and 31. The tone was set. And he took the wishbone, took the black athlete, and took the speed and turned it into a track meet in Norman in the mid-70s. And then in 1974, he won the national championship with Oklahoma being on probation. And that's when I fell in love with Barry Switzer. True, he might have been a little different. True, a lot of people didn't like him. But when you think about all the college coaches, when you get around college football fans, and we start talking about the greatest coaches that coached the game, right? You hear Bear Bryant, you hear Bobby Bowden, you hear Bob Devaney, you think about Tom Osborne, you think about Vince Dooley, you think about Lavelle Edwards, you think about Archie Cooley, you think about Darryl Royal, you think about Eddie Robertson, you think about Billy Nix, you think about Jack Gaither, Bobby Dodd, but nobody, and let me throw Nick Saban in there, nobody really mentions Barry Switzer kind of in that arena. I'm going to tell you, after we finish the show today, please put respect on Barry Switzer's name as the head coach at the University of Oklahoma. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, I've been a guy, I've said it on numerous occasions, that Pete Rose, for example, is one of those guys that really polarizes people's opinion. You can love him as a player or hate him as a player, and then as a person, you almost have to put him in a different perspective. Barry made some mistakes along the way. We will discuss a few of those. Love him or hate him, you have to respect what he did for the game of football and how he changed it. You mentioned a couple things already, but we'll go over this now. Born in 1937, so Barry is now 87 years old. He was born on October 5th. Small town. You mentioned that he grew up in Crossett, Arkansas. Ashley County is where he is from, and turmoil was a part of Barry's life. His father was a bootlegger, made their money with him selling moonshine and running from one end of the state to the other, delivering and providing a living, if you want to call it that, for his family. He was arrested when it was 1954 while Barry was in high school and convicted and put in jail. So Barry's father missed his senior year of football. Barry had a younger brother named Donnie, and the Arkansas State Police were visitors to the home quite a few times. They were home in 1959 on August 26th. So it's just about the time for Barry to go off to college, and he was going to play football, which he did at Arkansas. It was a little bit before when Jimmy Jones and Jimmy Johnson, and Jerry Jones were there for the national championship. But long story short is Barry was in his room, brother was in the house, mom walks in, gives him a kiss on the cheek, and says something real quick. And you know how a teenage boy, yeah, Ma, I got you, yeah, no problem. And about 45 seconds later, there's a gunshot. And because of the father's lifestyle, his promiscuity with other women, she had become an alcoholic and on barbiturates, and she decided to take her life on the back porch. And so Barry had to deal with that for years and for decades. He held that in his heart as he was responsible for what had happened to his mom. It wasn't until about 30 years later that they went through some old books and they found a suicide note. And Barry was able to come to terms with that But there's a lot of turmoil that this man had in his life. He and his wife, Kay, were married. They had 3 kids, and they divorced in 1981. And a little bit of promiscuity in Barry's life. And so there are some problems that this man has had. But there is one thing for sure. And Scott Case was a guest on our show when we first started a few months ago. And Scott went to Oklahoma, and he played for Barry, not only in college, but with the Dallas Cowboys a little bit later on in Scott's career in the mid 90s. And unequivocally, Scott goes, that man right there helped me and helped so many of my teammates to get through to the next level in their life, whether that be pro football, whether it be just playing college football, just getting your degree. And then afterwards, if they ever needed any help, and articles that have been written about Barry Switzer, there isn't a story out there that doesn't include in a footnote that Barry today will do anything for any of his players. He's written checks for $25,000 to help somebody get a car when he needed one. There are stories about people all over the state of Oklahoma, and especially in Norman, that needed some financial help. And if truth be told, Barry or Barry's father would have provided a little bit of assistance, if you can call it that. But focus on the football field is something that he certainly had. Vincent, let's talk a little bit about his high school days, his college days, and obviously going into his coaching career at the University of Oklahoma.
Well, you know, he's an all-state lineman. He went to the in-state school, the University of Arkansas. I know a lot about that school because I attended it from 78 to 81.
Yes, you did.
Beautiful campus, up in the hills, one highway in, one highway out. Played on the 1959 team. Was a teammate of one of the greatest receivers that played in the NFL and the AFL, Lance Alworth, Jim Moody, Wayne Harris, a very good football team. Played under Frank Broyles. And I didn't realize this till last night. Remember when Frank Broyles used to be the color analysis with Keith Jackson on the College Football Network?
Of course.
Frank Broyles was a guy, he was low-key. Wasn't really a guy that had a lot of excitement back during that time, like, let's say, Woody Hayes. But I didn't realize how close Barry Switzer, Jimmy Johnson, and Jerry Jones was close to Frank Broyles. And Frank Broyles never let you know that. And Frank Broyles went to Georgia Tech and played under Bobby Dodd and is from Decatur, Georgia. But getting back to Barry earlier years, Barry realized that in college he wasn't going to play in the NFL. Coaching became a part of his life. And Frank Broyles hired him as one of the youngest assistants in college football after he finished school. After Barry went off, he was in the military. And Frank Broyles called back and Barry got a furlough where he can come back to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and coach. And Barry Switzer was already around greatness. The 1964 coaching staff, that won the national championship with Jimmy Johnson, Jerry Jones, the man that was one of the fastest backs in the nation at that time. They called him White Lightning, Ken Hatfield. You should know about him, Harper. He coached the Air Force.
Yep.
Went on to Clemson, came back to Arkansas, didn't work out. But look at the coaching staff that Barry Switzer learned from in 64. Hayden Fry, Doug Dickey, Johnny Majors, Bill Pace. All of them became head coaches. And Barry learned under them. When Doug Dickey got the job at the University of Tennessee, he wanted to bring Barry along. Barry said, no, I'm not ready. I'm going to stay here at Arkansas. And they had Jim McKenzie, Barry's best friend, who was also on that staff. And McKenzie ended up getting the job at Oklahoma. And Barry Switzer followed him. Because one thing Barry Switzer said, if I'm going to become a head coach, I want to go somewhere I can win. No disrespect to an Iowa State. No disrespect to a Rice. He wasn't going nowhere. He wanted to go somewhere where he had a chance. He goes up to Oklahoma. He's on the offensive side of the ball. Jim McKenzie is the head coach. After that first year, Jim McKenzie dies of a heart attack. Chuck Fairbanks was on the staff. Chuck Fairbanks gets promoted to head coach. And he brings Barry Switzer on and promote him as assistant head coach and offensive coordinator. Now, me being 10, 11 years old, I still ain't heard nothing about Oklahoma. I know they played in the 6-day Orange Bowl against Tennessee, and they had a nose guard by the name of Granfield Liggins that was a pretty good football player, and a guy named Eddie Hinton that played for the Baltimore Colts / Indianapolis Colts now. But when I found out and I heard about Barry Switzer, it started in 1971 with the track meet up there in Norman, Oklahoma, when the Sooners went to the Wishbone, Sooner Magic, Boomer Sooner. And the guy that started it was that White Lightning guy from Abilene, Texas, Jack Mildred. They had the long blonde hair. And that 71 season, Oklahoma led the nation in rushing, 472 yards a game. And I remember the third game of the year. No disrespect, Mr. Travers, who bees on with us on Thursday. But they put that whooping on USC that year. It had almost 516 yards. And I said then, let me take a look at this Oklahoma team. Greg Pruitt had over 1,665 yards rushing. The little man from Houston, Texas, almost averaged 9 yards a carry. Mr. Mildred went over 1,000 yards and had almost 878 yards rushing. But that track meet with that bone, Leon Crosswhite, Joe Wiley, and Greg Pruitt were at another level. Then the game of my lifetime. I've seen a lot of college football games in my time, Harper. Personally, and up close, and I've been very fortunate to go to the University of Arkansas. But if you can't get up for that 1971 Classic on Thanksgiving Day, over my grandmother's house, Miss Leela Turner, uncles, aunts, liquor flowing, turkey going, macaroni going, that good old sweet apple pie, Nebraska and Oklahoma. And my uncle was living in Detroit at the time, Mr. Opie Turner. He had came home for the holidays. And that game was a classic. Nebraska 35, Oklahoma 31. Back and forth. Johnny Rogers opened the game up with a punt return for a touchdown. Jack Mildred played his heart out, but they couldn't beat the Huskers and Bob Devaney, Jerry Taggart, Bill Kennedy, and Rich Glover, who had 22 tackles in that game. But that's when I kind of fell in love with Oklahoma. The 72 season, Oklahoma did real well. But in 72, they went to the Sugar Bowl, played Penn State. But after the game, Barry Switzer knew he was becoming a head coach. Didn't nobody know, because Chuck Fairbanks came to him and said, you know what? I'm going to take the job with the New England Patriots. And Barry Switzer said, are you kidding me? You the next man up. Now, get this. The Oklahoma Brass didn't want to hire Barry Switzer because, as you just mentioned, Hop, lifestyle, and then he had an incident where he punched the student out in the bathroom saying something bad about the former head coach, Jim McKenzie, that had died. They was really skeptical. And Barry Switzer got hired January 29, 1973. And college football changed forever from a speed standpoint. And Boomer Sooner Magic was rolling. And I say this, in the 70s, from 73 to 78, and I know Mr. Stephen Travers, I know you watching this, baby. And I know how you feel about the USC Trojan Brass. But that 74 team that Oklahoma had, I would put them up against any college football team of today and tomorrow, and the Alabama teams of the 60s. Y'all would not been able to stay on the field with that Boomer Sooner team. Joe Washington, Steve Davis, Zach Henderson, Randy Hughes, all the brothers from Afala. I think they were pretty good players, Hop. The Salmon brothers.
Yeah.
Rod Schultz. And the track meet started. And that 74 team went undefeated and won the national championship, was on probation. Then in 75, Coach Switzer shocked the world. Harper, you've been a college football player at a high level and you know the game just as anybody else. I'm going to ask you today, do you know any school in a recruiting period that signed 13 out of 19 blue chippers?
Back then, I was just going to ask you, Vincent, back then, recruiting was so much different, and Barry mastered it. Not just the black athlete, but his ability to connect because of his age with the kids in a way that a lot of older coaches had no idea how to do. And that's what I think was the difference. You mentioned all these great athletes that he brought in, the speed that he brought in, the way that he said, we're going to beat you with our legs. We're going to work hard, and they did. Vincent, what gets me, they didn't lose a game until his third year that he was there. They were 10-0-1 his first year, 11-0 they win the national championship his second year, and then they go 11-1 and they win the Natty again, but they had one loss. They had 10-1 during the regular season, and they win 8 straight Big 8 championships when he gets there. That's unbelievable to me. Yes, the keys were already in place in terms of there were some good athletes that were already there. He just needed to keep the motor running. I think he did a fantastic job. I mean, the first 8 years, you win your title in your conference, and you get to go to a bowl game, whatever that is. And in 2 of those cases, in year 2 and year 3, even though they're on probation, he ends up winning the national championship, and then he does it again in 1985. His ability to recruit as well as coach and to coach his coaches, by far, should be up there ranked highly with anyone that's done. They did a magnificent job. Your thoughts?
Going back to the 1975 recruiting class, this was when I got real heavy in the recruiting. I was a 15-year-old down in the 901 Memphis, Tennessee. And Texas at the time ruled college football's pumping players out. And I just told Harper, they got 13 out of the 19 best players in Texas. One of the greatest recruiting classes ever in college football. Billy Sims, Hooks, Texas. Thomas Lott, San Antonio. Kenny King, Clarendon, Texas. Reggie Kinlaw, I don't know where he was from, but I'm sorry. Greg Roberts from Nacogdoches, Texas. Phil and Paul Talbert out of Houston. Bud Hubert, another Texan. Daryl Hunt from Odessa. George Crummy from Tyler. Those football players were rated the best at their positions. Every school in the country wanted those guys. And Barry Switzer was able to pull that off. After he had, as Harper just told you, he hadn't lost a game in his first 3 seasons. And watching that bone, it was something special. With Joe Washington, the Billy Sims, oh my God, Elvis Peacock out of Miami, Buster Rhymes. And I'm going to tell you this. When I was a freshman at Arkansas, I think his best team was a 78 team. That team had Thomas Lott, David Overstreet, Kenny King, Reggie Kinlaw, Phil Talbert, Darrell Ray, Steve Rhodes. To me, that was his best team ever. And he lost to Nebraska at the end of the year and ended up playing Nebraska back in the Orange Bowl, the year Billy Sims won the national championship. If we sit back and just look at what he done and the players he put out, he had Troy Aikman there in 84. And he decided, Troy, I love you, but I got to go back to the bone and take a young man out of Carson, California, his last national championship. And he probably had, like him or not, judge him or not, I'm going to tell you, there's been a lot of great college football players that's played the linebacker position that I've seen and make me get chills and come out of my seat. I saw Robert Bazile up close and personal at Jackson State. I saw my man, Jerry Robertson at UCLA on TV. Richard Batman Wood when he was at USC. There's been some great players at that linebacker position, man. George Webster, I remember him at Michigan State. But Harper, take all the foolishness that a lot of people say about Brian Bosworth. But man, and I love Mike Singletary. I saw him up close and personal have 33 tackles against the University of Arkansas when I was a true sophomore. But I don't think it was any linebacker that talked more noise, did it from a marketing perspective, that backed it up on the field than Brian Bosworth. Outstanding football player. Could run sideline to sideline. Bear Switzer's had some serious football players. Players that kind of was the motto of what he put out there. The swag, the confidence, the loyalty to the University of Oklahoma, the competitive fire, and the one objective, winning. And we had Mr. Scott Case on about a couple of months ago. And I went back and I was doing my research last night, and I got to put respect even more on Scott Case's name because he played safety. And let me throw Marcus Dupree in there that didn't work out, but at the time, maybe the greatest high school running back that ever came into college football. And Scott Case was on the field against that. Patrick Collins, Earl Johnson, Danny Bradley, Marcus Dupree. You got to put respect on Mr. Case's name. Boomer Sooner. Like Barry Switzer or not, all the great coaches I just mentioned, a lot of people don't talk about Barry Switzer, like I said, in the light of Nick Saban or John McKay. But I'm going to tell you something. I had to go rethink, and I put Barry Switzer in there in the top 3. The Oklahoma teams of the 70s changed college football, man, from their speed standpoint. The touchdowns, the long plays, that's a crazy number that I had, and I can't remember right now. It's a number of times Oklahoma scored over 50 points in a game against an opponent. I'm going to find that stat. Hopefully it comes back to me. Excuse me to my audience here today. But the man had 54 consensus All-Americans in his 13 years as a coach. 54 consensus All-Americans. And the one thing about Barry Switzer, he loved competition. And I go back to a game in your beautiful hometown, 73. And I'm going to give it back to you, Harper. Hollywood. Saturday night. First year Oklahoma was on probation. USC was coming off that national championship season of 72. Remember, Mr. Travers, I know you looking, you talk about that 72 team all the time. Well, that night before 85,000 in the LA Coliseum, Oklahoma came in there and should have won that football game, ended up in the 7-7 tie. But they only held USC to 151 yards of total offense. And that was that USC team that had AD, Anthony Davis, Pat Hayton. And what sticks out in my game, and I got to bring this up, Lynn Swann was a senior that year. And I remember Oklahoma signed the number 1 JUCO college player in the country named Tony Peters at corner, who played 12 years in the league. And I remember leading up to that game, USC said, Lynn Swann is going to have a party tonight. Mr. Tony Peters, as we say in the hood, he put that glove on you. Lynn Swann only had 1 reception that night. And the Oklahoma tied that game without Leroy Salmon playing. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
1973, they're 10-0-1. 74, they're 11-0. 75, they're 11-1. They win the national championship. They lost 2 games in 76 and 77. They go 11-1 in 1978. They win the Orange Bowl. 79, they go 11-1. They win the Orange Bowl again. They're 10-2 in 1980. During those first 8 years, as I mentioned earlier, just amazing how good they played. They had a rough couple of years. They lose 4 games in 81, 82, and 83. They turn it around and win the Big 12 in 84. They're national champions in 85. You mentioned Brian Bosworth. There's a funny recruiting story that Barry shows up at Brian's high school, and he's wearing a fur coat. Without the sunglasses, he looks just like Joe Namath. He's got 3 fur coats. He decides to break out one of them, and he shows up, and he's in the auditorium, and he doesn't see anybody in there. So he goes to the cafeteria, and it's packed. There's kids all over the place. It's lunchtime. And he goes, "Hey, I'm looking for Brian Bosworth. Can anyone tell me where the boss is?" And one kid points over there, and Brian was in there, and he gets up. He goes, "Boss, I want to talk to you. Come on out here." And they go outside. There's the kids that are laughing and doing, "Hey, coach, you embarrassed me." And Switzer tells it like this. He goes, "Yeah, I did embarrass him in that cafeteria in high school, but Brian did a heck of a lot to embarrass me a little bit later on once he went to Oklahoma." So it was turnabout is fair play. But I played with Boz in Seattle. His shoulders were gone, but here's an enigma with the hair, but you mentioned earlier, he backed it up, didn't he? His speed, his power, his ability to get into the backfield. Thank goodness he had a great defensive line in front of him, because the big guys on offense that were trying to block him, they were too busy encountering a defensive end or a tackle, and Brian ends up getting through in the backfield and making big plays. But Barry Switzer was an excellent recruiter. In 1988, his last year at Oklahoma, they go 9-3. They lose in the Citrus Bowl, and Barry's out of a job. And then he and his buddy Jerry Jones gets a call a couple of years later when Jimmy Johnson has announced that he's going to leave the Dallas Cowboys and that he is going to go to the Miami Dolphins. And next thing you know, he's coaching in the NFL. And he wins the Super Bowl there. And what a talented group of players that he had. His job was just basically to herd the cattle's or the cats together and just make sure everything run. He made Troy angry. Of all people, Troy didn't want to have to play for Barry Switzer again. He had already left Oklahoma to go to UCLA. But Vincent, your thoughts real quick on what Barry's NFL career turns out to be, because he's one of only 3 coaches that was able to win a national championship and a Super Bowl.
You explained it to the point, Mr. LaBelle. He walked into a phenomenal situation in Dallas. Hell, you could have coached the Cowboys to a Super Bowl with all that talent they had. And I was happy for him because he had left Oklahoma on a bad sledding. Things didn't work out. And when they announced he was the head coach, I was shocked at 36 years old. I almost fell out of my chair. Are you kidding me? But it just tell you how talented that Dallas Cowboys team was. Russell Maryland, Deion Sanders, Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Daryl Johnson. Come on, Tony Tolbert, Charles Haley, Nate Newton, Eric Williams, Larry Allen. And that Dallas team was deep too. They had been to the Super Bowl 3 out of the last 4 years and won 3 Super Bowls out of 4 years. Just happy for him, man. And like I said, I really respected him because he was a loyal guy. And remember when we had Mr. Scott Case on, and Scott said, "Hey, you over here in Atlanta, why don't you come on over here and get a ring?" The loyalty he had to his former players. And that's love, man. Scott Case said it all a couple of months ago when he was with us here on 100 Yards of Football. As I said before, a lot of people didn't like Coach Switzer. A lot of people said Coach Switzer didn't do things the right way at Oklahoma. A lot of people didn't like him in the NFL because you're, as we say, a grandstander. But when you look at it overall, he's only one of the few coaches that's won a Super Bowl and a national championship. To your people down in Alabama, Nick Saban didn't do it, okay? He went to the NFL and didn't like it. Barry Switzer is one of the few coaches that's won a Super Bowl ring and a national championship. I love the man, Harper. To me, he changed college football. Did he have some problems? No question about it. But he did it his way. And I heard him on another radio podcast last week. He said, now we got the NIL. And I did that in the 70s, and I came under scrutiny. I was like the worstest guy in the world. Back to you, Harper.
Well, that's a whole nother thing. But how do you keep players? It was a different era back then. And back at Oklahoma, you had to find ways of having a brown paper bag with whatever it is that you were looking to get. But you had to keep it all on the QT. Don't tell anybody. But Jimmy Johnson wins the national championship at the University of Miami, and then a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. Barry Switzer does the same thing with Oklahoma and the Dallas Cowboys. And then Pete Carroll is the third and only other coach who was able to win a national championship at the NCAA level. And then with the NFL, he wins the Super Bowl. So Barry's in some amazing company. His coaching career while he was at Dallas was 12-4 the first year. They end up losing to the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco in the NFC Championship game. The following year, they win the Super Bowl. That was the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Tempe, Arizona. And then the following year, they lose in the divisional game to the Carolina Panthers. They were 6-10 in 1997. That was Barry's last year of coaching. And since then, he's gone on back at Oklahoma. He knows he's the king. With a capital K, he's the king. And he's in a place where he gets to entertain. He's got a house in the back of his property where if you want to rent it, Airbnb, and go to a game. There was a story that was written, and a family from Tennessee had come out to go to the Tennessee-Oklahoma game. And imagine having Barry Switzer be your host and make sure that everything that you need for the barbecue is ready to go. Just absolutely amazing what he's been able to do. Vincent, real quick, I just wanted to mention one other thing, and I'll be reading a little bit of this, but David Wilson from ESPN writes in this story that Ashley Snyder in 2008 found out that she was adopted. She was visiting her family in Alabama when the news got to her. She was a paralegal in Oklahoma City, and when she got back to Oklahoma, she asked one of the lawyers if she could get some assistance in trying to find out a little bit more about her adoption. It was closed, and so the lawyer told her it would be very difficult for her to find any information, and it was. Because of the closed adoption, all the papers were sealed, and only if both parties, the person who sealed it and the adoptee, wanted to, and they have to communicate with one another, can the records be opened? It's a very difficult process to get everybody to agree. And 3 years later, she found out a little bit more information. Her dad, her adopted father, bought her and her husband, Ashley was married at the time. She had 2 kids. Bought her a DNA kit from Ancestry.com. And she finds out that she has a lot of relatives that are oddly enough from Crossett, Arkansas. And a few of them, their last name is Switzer. Uncles, cousins, family members. In 2019, she had her 3rd child, and she named this child Crimson. That was her name, daughter. And her father was an Alabama fan. And no coincidence, just that's what she named it. Oddly enough, that's the same color of the University of Oklahoma. But there was a woman in Oregon who calls up young Ashley. And again, this is in 2019. And she says to her, I know who your mother is. She was a nurse back in 1988. They find out that that's when Ashley was born. On March 5th in 1988, she was born in Noble, Oklahoma, which is just outside of Norman. She had a sister, and grandmother helped tell the mom that we should have an adoption rather than an abortion. So Ashley is born in 1988, and oddly enough, they find out that the mother had dated one Barry Switzer. Now, Barry was married to his wife Kay until 1981. They had 3 kids. There was Doug, there was Kathy, and there was Greg. Kathy was the first 3 kids with Barry and with Kay, but they divorced in 81, and so Barry kind of was on the prowl. And at 50 years old, he meets a 24-year-old nursing student in Oklahoma, didn't realize anything about it. The mom kept it a secret. There was a paternity test, and the results were 99.99% positive that Barry would be the father of Ashley. He found this out. She found this out. And instead of running from it, instead of doing something that would be a little bit more risque, if you will, Barry calls her. He finds Ashley's phone number and he says, "Young lady, this is Coach Switzer. Can we talk?" So she still to this day will call him Coach because he didn't introduce himself as Barry to his daughter, but he didn't run away from it. And now he says he has 4 kids, and I think he now has 13 grandchildren. And Barry Switzer is a guy that just always has a smile on his face now. Life isn't always easy, but he looks at it with a different perspective. He's out to help people. He helps his former players. He helps people in the Oklahoma area. There's a restaurant in town that he just really had a fond passion for the owner, helped him change things and rearrange the restaurant. He scheduled meetings and press conferences there so that the restaurant would be used a little bit more, and it's a thriving success. They even have a Switzer sandwich that they offer. So Barry Switzer, we spent a little bit of time talking about him today, but what a life that man has led. At 87 years old, he is still living it to the fullest. And even though he's slowing down a little bit and kind of struggling with his age, he still runs at 100 miles an hour. So our tribute to him, our passion for what he's been able to do, not only for college, but for pro football, for football in general, is certainly at the highest level. And Vincent, before we go, give me your final thoughts about one Barry Switzer.
Love the man. Respect him to the highest level. Changed my life as a college football fan and as a person and what he did at the University of Oklahoma. Sometimes God has a plan that we don't even know about, but usually ends up pretty good if you stay right and you stay humble. Think about this in my life when I think about Barry Switzer. Went to the same school I went to, graduated from the University of Arkansas. To the Arkansas Nation, called them Hogs. Y'all don't know about that. Then he ends up going to Oklahoma. Boomer, Sooner. What more can you say? He invented Sooner magic. I know Bud Wilkerson put it in place in the 50s, but Barry Switzer took it to another level. And all those great players that played at that school and human beings. Look at Spencer Tillman, one of the best announcers on CBS right now. J.C. Watts became a U.S. Senator. A lot of people don't talk about that. The late, great Steve Davis, who ran them wishbones in the 70s, ended up being an outstanding pastor in a pallet, died in a plane crash. Outstanding individual. Scott Case, look what he's doing in the metro Atlanta area. Even Marcus Dupree comes back and visits him. They didn't see eye to eye. And Billy Sims, look at the impact that he's made on Billy Sims. Billy Sims was struggling financially after he finished his career with the Lions. Barry Switzer helped him to get into the barbecue business. And I looked online last night. Billy Sims barbecues are worth $5 billion. Locations in Oklahoma, Texas, Detroit. But see, we don't talk about Barry Switzer in that light. We always want to bring him up being the son of the bootlegger. You better recognize, you better put respect on his name. Because Barry Switzer, whether you like him or not, Barry Switzer, loyalty, hard worker, competitor, mental toughness, a winner. Let me say that one more time. A winner. The only coach to win a national championship in the Super Bowl. My gentleman here, Harper LaBelle, told you there's only 2 other coaches that done that in the history of this game. In a fighter. Boomer, Sooner. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
Well, he certainly led a very interesting life, and we hope that we were able to share just a little bit of that with you. And as Vincent said, whether you love him or hate him, you certainly have to put a notch of respect next to Barry Switzer. I know you may not like him. He especially if you're a Cornhusker or a 49er fan, it doesn't matter.
Throw Texas in there too.
But certainly Barry Switzer has his place amongst college and pro football's royalty. He's at the table, and we wanted to share a little bit of that with you. We certainly hope that you've learned a little bit more about the man. Barry Lynn Switzer, born on October 5th, 1937. What a very interesting life, very unique life. I'm certain they'll make a movie about him someday. So we wanted to let you know as much as we could about him. And gosh, this is one of the longest features that we've ever done. So for Jeremiah Long, thank you, Jeremiah, for putting this all together. For Vincent Turner, our host, I'm Harper LaBelle. We want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Thank you so much for being a part of today's show. We hope you have a fantastic day.